In 1944, Japan launched its newest and most advanced aircraft carrier, one that was supposed to survive the heaviest bombs, strongest torpedoes, and the worst battles of the Pacific War. She had armor like a battleship, speed like a greyhound, and a name symbolizing rebirth, Taihō, the Great Phoenix. But when the moment came, her survival depended not on steel or engineering, but on the training and preparation of the humans aboard. This is the ultra-extended, full story of IJN Taihō. The carrier that proved a warship is only as strong as its crew. IJN Taihō's story begins long before her keel touched steel in the early 1940s, rooted in Japan's evolving understanding of naval air power and the lessons they absorbed, sometimes slowly, from early Pacific battles. By the late 1930s, the Imperial Japanese Navy had already built some of the most elegant and deadly carriers in the world: Akagi, Kaga, Soryu, Hiryu, and the highly successful Shokaku class. These ships featured powerful air groups, long range, and skilled aviators trained under a rigorous pre-war system. But all of them shared one problem inherited from pre-war doctrine. They used unarmored flight decks similar to American carriers like Yorktown. This worked fine in exercises and theory, but war, especially modern aerial warfare, was cruel and unforgiving. The Japanese were about to learn that the moment aircraft joined naval combat, survivability mattered as much as offensive capability. Taihō was born as part of Japan's attempt to adapt, a new direction in carrier design that tried to combine the advantages of both the U.S. Navy and the Royal Navy while avoiding the weaknesses of either. Her designers built her around the idea of a carrier that could take a hit and keep fighting. They armored her flight deck, strengthened her sides, and encased her machinery in heavy protective plating. On paper, Taihō was the perfect evolution. The speed and striking power of Shokaku combined with the toughness of British armored carriers like the Illustrious class. But in naval architecture, every improvement has a cost. Armor meant weight. Weight meant deeper draft. And deeper draft meant that Taihō sat lower in the water than any previous Japanese carrier, so low that her lower hangar was just above the waterline, and her elevator wells dipped below it. This flaw wasn't obvious on launch day in 1943. But it would become fatal in 1944. Still, at the time of her commissioning in March 1944, Taihō represented the pinnacle of Japanese carrier building, sleek, modern, and imposing. She carried an air group of around 65 aircraft, smaller than U.S. Essex-class carriers, but typical for the Japanese doctrine of quality over quantity. Taihō's designers accepted the reduction because the armor consumed so much of the weight budget. Her 3-inch armored flight deck was intended to stop bombs from diving aircraft. Her 6-inch armored magazine belts were meant to prevent catastrophic secondary explosions, something painfully familiar after the losses at Midway. On top of that, she carried modern radar systems, improved fire suppression gear, and high-speed machinery capable of propelling her at over 33 knots, comparable to the fastest U.S. carriers. Her designers even envisioned catapults, but Japan never perfected the tech, so rocket-assisted takeoff gear was stored instead. The ship was, in many ways, a symbol of what Japan hoped the rest of the war would look like: tough, resilient, capable of fighting American carriers on equal terms. But the reality of 1944 was different. Japan was losing its veteran aviators rapidly. Training programs had been shortened from years to months. Maintenance personnel were green. Even damage control teams lacked the deep experience of their American counterparts. Taihō embodied advanced engineering, but she did not get an advanced crew. She was meant to be the first ship of a whole new generation, but one by one Japan's ambitious carrier programs were canceled or destroyed by shortages, bombings, and shifting priorities. Ultimately, Taihō sailed into battle as the only ship of her class, carrying the hopes of a navy that still dreamed of a decisive victory, even as the strategic situation collapsed around them. When Taihō joined the mobile fleet under Vice Admiral Jisaburo Ozawa for Operation Ago, Japan's grand plan for defending the Marianas, the carrier force that once shocked the world at Pearl Harbor, was a shadow of its former self. Many of its pilots were fresh trainees. Many of its mechanics had minimal sea service. And almost every ship present had already suffered from years of attrition. Taihō, despite being brand new, entered a fleet struggling not just with fuel shortages and outdated doctrine, but with the erosion of the human skill that had once defined Japanese naval aviation. Her crew tried to compensate with enthusiasm, discipline, and a deep sense of duty. But enthusiasm cannot replace experience. Damage control, always the Japanese Navy's weakest area, depended heavily on drilled procedures, calm coordination, and an understanding of how to anticipate escalating damage. American carriers had entire teams trained exhaustively through repeated peacetime simulations. Japanese carriers, pressured by wartime tempo, often lacked such consistency. This would matter soon. When Taihō sailed into the Philippine Sea in June 1944, she appeared outwardly powerful and ready. Photographs from the time show her sharp bow cutting through the water, her armored deck gleaming under the Pacific sun, her air group warming engines as she prepared to launch waves of aircraft to repel the advancing American forces. But within the ship, a hidden vulnerability traveled with her, a crew that had never practiced responding to serious internal damage under real combat pressure. And in war, the first mistake often becomes the last. As Taihō continued steaming as part of Vice Admiral Jisaburo Ozawa's mobile fleet, her crew attempted to stabilize the ship after the torpedo strike from USS Albacore. But by early afternoon, the deeper, structural issues of her design began to reveal themselves. Although she had an armored flight deck and a powerful armored belt, giving her the appearance of a ship capable of withstanding tremendous punishment, the very concept of mixing Shokaku-style design philosophy with British-style armored protection resulted in awkward engineering compromises. Taihō's heavy side armor forced the ship to ride low in the water, a trait unusual for Japanese carriers. This low freeboard meant that the forward elevator pit and lower hangar deck were perilously close to the sea surface. When the torpedo ruptured the aviation fuel tanks and supply lines, gasoline began flowing into these pits and pooling in spaces that should never have been so close to the hull. As the hours passed, junior engineers realized that the forward elevator area, normally a structural cavity designed only to move aircraft between decks, had become a basin collecting flammable liquid. But because the fuel had no fire burning yet, inexperienced officers believed the situation was under control. Their assessments underestimated how aviation gasoline behaved in enclosed compartments, and how quickly vapors could permeate every part of the ship. In the meantime, Taihō's hangar operations continued in full motion. Aircraft were being spotted for the next wave. Mechanics moved fuel hoses. Armorers rolled carts of ammunition. Flight directors coordinated takeoffs. And pilots briefed for the next strike against Task Force 58. A well-trained carrier crew would have recognized that a complex flight operation combined with compromised fuel systems was an extremely high-risk scenario. U.S. Navy carriers had spent years drilling on damage control. Even routine operations involved layered safety measures to prevent vapor buildup. But Taihō's crew, only 3 months into life aboard a brand-new ship, lacked the institutional knowledge, the refined procedures, and the hierarchy of damage control authority that American carriers possessed after years of wartime experience. Officers aboard Taihō felt pressure to keep launching aircraft to support Ozawa's plan, even as the hidden fuel vapor threat grew stronger with every minute. By early afternoon, the crew attempted multiple ad hoc fixes to vent fumes. They opened ventilation ducts, lowered the aft elevator, swung open bulkhead hatches, and even smashed out portholes to create makeshift airflow. But these actions worked against each other. The tightly sealed nature of Taihō's enclosed hangars, meant to reduce bomb damage and protect aircraft during storms, made ventilation extremely difficult. The Japanese pre-war carrier design philosophy favored internalized hangars, which were excellent for maintaining aircraft but terrible for dispersing dangerous gas mixtures. In contrast, American carriers used open-sided hangars that naturally vented vapors. Taihō's enclosed hangar was a trap. As evaporating fuel migrated through ducting, cable passageways, and damaged piping, vapors spread from the forward elevator well into compartments throughout the ship. This culminated in a disastrous decision. The chief engineer ordered maximum ventilation ship-wide, believing that more airflow meant more safety. Instead, ventilation fans pulled fuel vapors into passageways, engineering spaces, and compartments that had never been contaminated before. In a very short time, Taihō was essentially filled with an invisible cloud of explosive gas. Outside, the broader battle raged on. The Battle of the Philippine Sea, the infamous Great Marianas Turkey Shoot, was turning into a devastating defeat for Japanese naval aviation. Waves of inexperienced Japanese pilots, flying aircraft with limited training hours, were being intercepted by fully radar-coordinated American fighters. Many never even reached the American fleet. Taihō's air group, despite launching with determination, was being whittled down with every strike. As losses mounted, aircraft returned low on fuel, damaged, or scattered. Deck crews hustled to recover them, push them below, or prepare them for relaunch, all while unaware that every spark, every switch, every movement inside the ship was becoming more dangerous. Taihō's commanding officers, meanwhile, remained confident that the ship was stable. Reports of fuel smell came in from multiple sections, but each report was treated in isolation rather than as part of an expanding systemic crisis. Without a unified damage control center, like those used on U.S. carriers, information became fragmented. Junior officers hesitated to override seniors, and compartment chiefs avoided making drastic decisions without orders. Instead of sealing off contaminated areas, they attempted to air them out. Instead of using foam to suppress fuel evaporation, they waited for a fire that never came. Ironically, Taihō's safety systems were excellent on paper: fire suppression gear, flooding pumps, ventilation controls, gas detectors, armored bulkheads. But without coordinated leadership and rigorous training, those systems were tools without craftsmen. By mid-afternoon, observers on nearby ships saw nothing unusual. Taihō continued to sail at nearly full speed. She still launched and recovered aircraft. Her flight deck looked calm. Smoke was not rising. To the outside world, she appeared to be the most modern, most robust carrier in the Japanese fleet, solid, powerful, and unshaken by a single torpedo hit. But inside the ship, gasoline fumes continued to thicken in invisible layers. In the lower hangar, maintenance crews had been warned not to turn on unnecessary electrical equipment. But some ventilation motors, lighting rigs, and machinery still ran. Taihō was full of wiring, thousands of meters of electrical systems running through bulkheads, decks, and conduits. A single loose connection, a sparking relay, even static discharge could ignite a fuel-air mixture. At around 2:30 p.m., that spark finally occurred. Whether it came from an electrical panel, a shorted conduit, or machinery deep inside the ship, no one would ever know. What mattered was that the vapor concentration was perfect for detonation. Survivors later described the moment as if the ship itself lifted from the sea. Deck plates buckled, bulkheads deformed, and a violent pressure wave roared through passageways. The flight decks swelled upward in places. Areas of Taihō's hull tore outward from internal pressure. The explosion did not sink her immediately, but it was catastrophic enough to incapacitate firefighting teams and cripple the ship's internal communications. Taihō was now mortally wounded, but still afloat. In the chaos that followed, officers attempted to regain control. But damage control teams, already fatigued and lacking experience, were overwhelmed. Ventilation ducts had become conduits for fire. The enclosed hangars trapped heat and smoke. Water used to fight fires mixed with spilled aviation fuel, creating slick, hazardous decks. Without proper compartmentalization or coordinated ventilation control, smoke spread faster than the crew could respond. Equipment malfunctioned, hoses tangled, pumps jammed. Crews tried to save aircraft, rescue injured sailors, and contain fires all at once. Multiple efforts contradicted each other. Some teams attempted to flood compartments, others tried to pump them dry. Without centralized command, the ship's internal battle became uncoordinated. As destroyers came alongside to help evacuate personnel, Taihō slowly lost stability. Her engines faltered as boiler rooms became contaminated with smoke. Electrical power fluctuated. Water entered lower compartments. The ship gradually settled by the bow. A second explosion later in the afternoon sealed her fate. Within hours, Taihō began to list heavily, stern rising slightly as water flooded forward spaces. Her flight deck tilted, aircraft slid, loose equipment crashed across compartments, and the order was given to abandon ship. Amid the confusion, hundreds of sailors jumped into the sea, while others climbed down ropes to waiting destroyers. Despite the scale of the explosion, rescue ships managed to save many survivors. As the sun lowered over the Philippine Sea, where Japanese naval aviation had fought its last great battle, Taihō slipped beneath the surface, stern first, taking with her the symbolic hope of Japan's next generation of carriers. The loss of Taihō was more than a tactical defeat. It was a lesson written in steel and fire. Technology alone does not make a warship invincible. A well-trained, well-coordinated crew is as important as armor, engines, or aircraft. Taihō's sinking forced naval architects, historians, and future admiralties to confront a fundamental truth. Advanced ships require equally advanced training. A carrier's survival depends not just on armor thickness or horsepower, but on the invisible discipline of its crew working as one, making the right decisions under immense pressure, and mastering their ship's complex systems long before battle begins. In the decades after the war, the story of Taihō became a case study in naval academies worldwide, a reminder that damage control, crew training, and preparedness often matter more than battleship-grade armor or theoretical design strength. In contrast, American carriers, such as Franklin, Bunker Hill, Yorktown, and Lexington, repeatedly demonstrated how expert damage control teams could keep ships afloat after extreme battle damage. Taihō, with excellent design potential but inexperienced crew execution, became the opposite example. Her fate remains a powerful message. No matter how modern or well-armored a warship may be, its true strength lies in the training, discipline, and resilience of the crew who operate her. The story of IJN Taihō is ultimately the story of what happens when technology advances faster than the human experience needed to operate it. An unforgettable reminder that every warship is only as strong as the hands that guide it. In the aftermath of Taihō's catastrophic internal explosion and the grim hours that followed, the sinking of Japan's newest and most advanced carrier forced the Imperial Japanese Navy to confront a harsh and irreversible truth. The gap between their wartime doctrine and their wartime reality had become impossibly wide, and no amount of bravery or technical innovation could compensate for the systemic weaknesses that now defined their carrier fleet. As destroyers and cruisers scrambled to recover survivors from the oil-slicked, debris-filled waters of the Philippine Sea, many officers aboard the rescue ships were stunned by the rapidity with which a supposed unsinkable, armored carrier had succumbed to a single torpedo hit, and the conversations that went on in those hours spoke volumes about the disillusionment spreading through the Japanese fleet. For decades, Japanese naval planners had believed their strengths lay in elite pilots, superb torpedo technology, and aggressive doctrine. But by 1944, the reality had reversed. Japan's pilot corps was dwindling. Their carrier crews lacked deep training, and their newest ships, though impressive on paper, suffered from rushed construction, inadequate damage control standards, and deep structural flaws in design philosophy. Taihō's loss became even more symbolic when placed within the broader context of the Battle of the Philippine Sea, which would soon be known as the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot, for the devastating losses suffered by Japanese naval aviation. Even before Taihō sank, waves of inexperienced pilots had been launched from her deck and from Shokaku and Zuikaku toward American carrier groups, only to be intercepted by masses of well-trained U.S. Hellcat fighters, coordinated through advanced radar systems. Those pilots who did survive quickly radioed back about the overwhelming American fighter screens, causing shock across the Japanese fleet. Taihō's sinking only made the situation worse. Without her, the Japanese lost one-third of their available deck capacity for recovering returning aircraft. Many pilots returning from already deadly missions found themselves forced to ditch in the sea because Taihō, where they expected to land, was gone. Survivors of the sinking later recalled hearing the bitter, desperate voices of friendly pilots calling out over the radio, searching for carriers that no longer existed. The impact of the sinking spread far beyond the immediate human loss on the ship. It effectively crippled the IJN's ability to maintain any kind of coordinated air assault during one of the most decisive carrier battles of the war. Meanwhile, aboard the remaining Japanese carriers, officers discussed the eerie similarities between Taihō's fate and the losses of the carriers at Midway 2 years earlier. Thinking of Akagi, Kaga, Soryu, and Hiryu, all destroyed by internal gasoline vapor explosions triggered by American attacks. Japan had learned almost none of the necessary lessons from Midway. The dangers of open hangars, the volatility of unprotected aviation fuel lines, and the need for rapid, aggressive, disciplined damage control were all issues repeatedly identified, yet never adequately solved. Taihō, despite being armored, replicated many of the same weaknesses, from insufficient hangar ventilation to poorly trained crews who lacked the experience to use the ship's advanced systems correctly. By contrast, the United States Navy had spent years perfecting damage control methods, constantly training crew members in simulated emergencies, drilling them in counterflooding, fire containment, and smoke evacuation. Ships like USS Enterprise, Yorktown, and Essex had survived massive damage through disciplined response, while those that eventually sank, such as USS Lexington and USS Yorktown, remained afloat far longer than expected, allowing most of their crews to escape. As senior Japanese officers studied the reports coming in from their rescue ships, many realized that no matter how boldly or beautifully a ship was designed, no matter how thick its armored flight deck might be, no matter how quick its top speed or how heroic its pilots, a single mistake, like failing to seal off elevator wells, mismanaging ventilation systems, or not applying foam to suppress evaporating gasoline, could turn a state-of-the-art warship into a floating bomb. The IJN's disaster reports concluded that Taihō's most dangerous enemy had not been the American torpedo, but the inexperience of her own crew, who lacked both the training and the judgment to recognize how to contain the escalating danger within the hangar decks. Vice Admiral Jisaburo Ozawa, commander of the mobile fleet, reportedly watched with deep grief from the bridge of his flagship as Taihō's barbed wire radio messages grew more frantic, describing worsening conditions. Fumes spreading, temperatures rising, ventilation failures, elevator pits flooded with fuel and seawater. By the time Taihō's bridge went silent, Ozawa knew his new flagship, the pride of Japan's carrier force, had been lost without ever truly proving itself in combat. And on a strategic level, Taihō's loss proved that Japan's naval strategy was collapsing from within. The country could no longer afford to replace first-line carriers, nor could it train pilots fast enough to replace those shot down over the Marianas. Even more devastating was the psychological blow. The Japanese High Command had believed Taihō would restore balance between the American and Japanese carrier fleets, symbolizing a rebirth of Japan's naval power, yet within just a few hours of her first major battle, she was gone. This sent shockwaves through the Imperial Navy, demoralizing officers and sailors who had hoped that Taihō's advanced armor and state-of-the-art systems would signal a new era of Japanese technological power. Instead, she sank on her very first combat operation, highlighting that no amount of steel could compensate for systemic failures in training, logistics, doctrine, and wartime production constraints. In the weeks that followed, Japanese newspapers attempted to hide the scale of the disaster, but rumors spread quickly among the fleet. Taihō had died not from American firepower, but from avoidable mistakes. This realization became a bitter turning point for many naval officers who had once believed in Japanese naval invincibility. Meanwhile, the United States analyzed the sinking with interest, noting that Japan had built a carrier that combined both armored flight deck concepts and high-speed capability, something that would influence future American carrier design after the war. But they also recognized that the ship's vulnerabilities revealed deeper fractures within the IJN's training and maintenance systems. Taihō's wreck now lies in the deep Pacific, a symbol not only of Japan's wartime ambition, but of the harsh lesson naval history repeats over and over. Technology, armor, guns, and speed mean almost nothing without a properly trained crew to operate, maintain, and protect the ship. This is why navies around the world, even today, study the sinking of Taihō as a case study in the critical importance of training, coordination, crew discipline, and damage control doctrine. And it stands as a reminder that no matter how modern or powerful a warship may appear, the true strength of a navy lies not in its steel, but in its sailors.